My roommate ate my food for months, so I made her last meal unforgettable. I lived with a human garbage disposal named Julia for 8 months, except the only garbage she disposed of were my groceries. Julia and I worked at the same tech startup and split a 2-bedroom apartment downtown. The first major incident happened the morning of my senior developer interview. I'd prepped a protein-packed breakfast the night before with my name clearly labeled on the container. Then a couple hours later, I found it empty in the sink with Julia's lipstick marks on the fork. When I confronted her, she claimed she thought it was leftover company food. Without time to buy lunch, I went into the interview running on an empty stomach and completely bombed it, with the hiring manager asking twice if I needed a break. After that day, I installed a mini fridge lock, but Julia just got more creative with her gaslighting. She moved my labeled containers to different shelves and claimed I must have forgotten where I put them. Then she began telling our coworkers I was weird about food and that I was clearly faking my shellfish allergy even though I wasn't. One morning, I found her eating my chocolate cookies while scrolling through her phone. When I confronted her, she looked confused and said I'd given it to her last night but must have forgotten. She even showed me a text she'd sent herself from my phone while I was sleeping that said, "Help yourself to my cookies." One evening, I discovered just how far Julia could go. After another exhausting day where Julia had eaten my lunch, I came home feeling defeated and went to grab my dinner of plain chicken and rice from the fridge. But as soon as I took the first bite, I knew it tasted wrong and then my mouth started burning with a familiar terror. I recognized the taste immediately as shrimp powder mixed throughout my entire meal. As my throat began closing, I fumbled desperately for my EpiPen and managed to stab it into my thigh. However, the reaction was already too severe, and my airway kept shrinking. I barely made it to the hallway before collapsing, gasping for air through what felt like a straw. Fortunately, my neighbor heard me wheezing and called 911 while I clawed at my throat. When the paramedics arrived, they had to intubate me right there on the hallway floor. I spent that night in the ICU with machines breathing for me while my body fought the reaction. The final hospital bill came to $8,000 I didn't have. Julia never visited or apologized for nearly killing me with her experiment. 3 days later, I returned to our apartment and felt like a ghost in my own home. My hands trembled every time I touched the fridge handle. The medical bills had wiped out my savings, and breaking the lease would cost another $3,000. I was literally trapped with someone who tried to kill me. Julia just acted like nothing had happened, humming while she made her morning coffee. She'd already eaten my bacon strips that I'd bought on the way home from the hospital. I sat on my bed holding the empty container and felt something change inside me. I suddenly remembered how Julia had told me she was lactose intolerant when she first moved in, so I got the brilliant idea of paying her back with her own method. That Tuesday afternoon, I created the most beautiful pad thai I'd ever made in my life. The noodles glistened with sauce that I'd perfected using heavy cream and milk powder for richness. Every vegetable was sautéed in butter until perfectly tender and golden. I even added extra lactose powder for authentic flavor. I photographed it for my coworkers and placed it prominently in the fridge with a red warning note that said, "Do not eat," in letters so large they were impossible to miss. Then I positioned a nanny cam at the perfect angle to capture anyone who opened the fridge. At exactly 11 p.m., I heard Julia's door creak open. My camera recorded her tiptoeing to the kitchen in her pajamas, opening the fridge, and staring at my container for 3 long seconds. She glanced around the empty kitchen before grabbing it with both hands. Back in her room, I heard her moaning about how amazing it tasted. A few minutes after that, the first bathroom sprint shook our thin walls. Her feet slapped against the floor as she ran desperately down the hall. The toilet flushed violently, and I heard her gasping between waves of cramping. She ran back and forth like a pinball between her room and bathroom. By 2 a.m., she was whimpering like a wounded animal. By 4 a.m., she was sobbing and begging God to make it stop. I counted 17 trips before her voice went hoarse from crying. At 6 a.m., she finally called 911 between retching sounds. The paramedics found her severely dehydrated on the bathroom floor. I stood in my doorway looking concerned and mentioned that she'd eaten my clearly labeled lactose food. Julia actually filed a lawsuit for intentional poisoning against me 2 weeks later through small claims court. The judge watched my security footage showing her stealing clearly labeled food and dismissed the case immediately. Julia had to pay my court fees on top of her medical bills. She moved out 3 days after losing.